The next unit is the nervous system. And so let's start into the nervous system by identifying the main function of the nervous system. And so there are sort of three categories here that are the main function of the nervous system. Let's say, for example, you have a cat. The cat is looking longingly at its empty dinner bowl. And how do I ultimately know that it wants dinner? And so the first function of the nervous system is to gather sensory information. I actually see the cat. The light comes off the cat, goes to my eyes. I might hear the cat making noise and so on. And so this is sensory information that my nervous system actually gathers from outside of my body in this case. My body can also get sensory information from inside my body in terms of things like temperature and so on. The second function is the integrative function. So I get that sensory information in, goes to my brain, to my spine, and then I process that information and relate it to things like memory, the last time my cat looked at the bowl, and I think the cat looks hungry. And the final function of the nervous system is motor. So this actually is taking information away from the brain and from the spine, causing me to do things like move. And so that's where the term motor comes from, like the motor of a car moves the car. The motor neurons go to the muscles of my body, the glands of my body, and so on, causing some sort of change. In this case, motion, where I go over to the cabinet, I get the food, and I bring it and fill the cat's bowl. So we've previously looked at nervous tissue and identified the cells that make up nervous tissue, but it's good to remind ourselves about those types of cells and identify their functions. So the first type of cell is the neuron. And so neurons generally look like this image here, and these cells are actually the type of cells that transmit the electrical signals that are ultimately the nervous signals. This allows the nervous system to act as a communication system because, as you can see here, the neuron is quite long, and we can transmit these electrical impulses from one place to another, causing changes in the body. Neuroglia are supportive cells or helper cells, and there's various types. In the peripheral nervous system, and we'll talk about the definition of that in a little bit, but we have Schwann cells. Schwann cells form the myelin sheath, or the coating that you see here that acts to coat the axons of neurons. And so just like we finished talking about the neuron on the left, and we can see that there's the myelin sheath wrapping around the axon. Those myelin sheaths in the peripheral nervous system are created by individual Schwann cells that have wrapped around the axon. In the central nervous system, we have various other types. Two that we'll look at here are the astrocyte, and so these are cells that actually form the blood-brain barrier. And so here you can see capillaries found within the spine or within the brain. And then the astrocytes are sort of coating over the spaces between the cells that form the capillary, and therefore forming a barrier to make sure that blood cells and too much fluid do not come out of the capillaries into the central nervous system. They're also attached to other nervous cells within the central nervous system so that nutrients can be moved from the capillary to those cells via help of the astrocytes. Another type of neuroglia that we find in the central nervous system are ependymal cells. Later on in this unit, we'll talk about the cerebrospinal fluid, a fluid that covers the brain and the spine. And so this fluid is actually made by the ependymal cells found in the central nervous system, found in the brain and spine. So let's take a closer look at the neuron. If we turn the neuron here, we can actually start to label the different portions of the neuron. And so in the middle here, we have the cell body. And just like any cell, we have a nucleus in the middle, the purple nucleus in this case, and then also the organelles that we found earlier in our unit on general cell structure. But extending off of the cell body, we have dendrites. These collect information from the areas surrounding the cell. So, for example, you might find these dendrites in skin, and they're monitoring the temperature of the skin. Or you might find them attached to maybe another neuron that is then going to send signals from itself to the dendrites of this neuron, causing it to then send a signal. Here, this one long extension is the axon. We mentioned it earlier, having the myelin sheath made up of the Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. But once the cell body has collected information from dendrites and processed whether to send a signal, if it's going to send the signal, it will travel along the axon down to some other tissue that it's trying to cause a response in. As that signal travels down, as the red line is indicated, the electrical impulse will finally reach the axon terminals, at which point the signal will move from this neuron to either another neuron or to a muscle or to some gland that it is triggering a response in.